Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first workshop of the National Climate Governance Summit. And we are kicking things off with workshop 1, which is the property development session. Since it's a very small crowd, please feel free to ask any questions that pop into your mind, and it's going to be a very intimate session, and it's more like a fireside chat with all our speakers and moderator. So without further ado, I'll hand it right over to our moderator, IR Gandhi Suppiah, who's the Regional Director of Southeast Asia under TSA Management. Thank you.
Thanks, Juanita. Since we want to keep it intimate, if we could get everybody maybe just to come to the center of this, come down, it'll be easier. There's this whole centerpiece here. Same price, exactly. Yeah. The same penalties, nothing changes. Except you're closer to us and we can hear you when you ask the questions. Come on, guys. Everybody over. So while you are rearranging yourself, good afternoon to everyone. So hope you had a good lunch, vegetarian lunch just now. My name is Gandhi Suppiah, as I mentioned. I'm the moderator for this session. The global GHG emissions is about 50 billion at this moment. That's approximately in that range, and that construction-related activities contribute to about 40% of that. And real estate development, particularly, is about half of that. So it's about 20% comes from real estate development. So with us today, we have 3 titans of this property development industry today. They have seen it all. They've helped shape the development of property development in Malaysia. And they are here to give their view on the sustainable property development aspects, considering low carbon society, impact of climate change, and the need to adapt and be resilient. So what we have is, we have about 10 minutes of discussion and probably some questions that I'll ask them. And then we'll leave it to the audience over here to ask them some probing questions that you have. Yeah. So what I'd like to do is, I'd like to start with Puan Norhasliza. She's the Senior Director for Climate Actions Group for MGTC. She's got over 20 years of experience in this and played a key role in several significant projects such as low carbon cities, energy audit, grant for industrial sector, My Hijau, the ASEAN energy management scheme, things like gold standards, energy management gold standards, and she's led development such as green technology master plan. So one, can you give us a view about, particularly the low carbon cities framework and that how has this, impacted local authorities?
Engineer Gandhi, for the introduction. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and very good afternoon. Yeah, as mentioned by Engineer Gandhi just now, what is low carbon cities framework? Yeah. So we know that cities play an important role, because we cannot deny that in cities actually contribute more than 70% of the GHG, of world GHG, and then contributes about 60% of energy consumption and also 70% of global waste. Yeah, so this is where cities play an important role in tackling climate change. Yeah, that's why in 2011, Malaysian government at that time it was KETA at the time, is a Ministry of Energy, Green Technology and Water. Yeah, so we together with MGTC, the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Corporation, we introduced a low carbon cities framework, or LCCF, which we introduce especially to the local authorities, and also developers to adopt this framework to reduce their carbon emission in the planning and the, it's more holistic approach to in the planning and also development of the cities. Yeah. So we developed that LCCF. We have about 155 local authorities in Malaysia. Yeah, but then as of now, we have trained about more than 70 local authorities or PBT in Malaysia. Yeah, and then just to give some introduction, what is low carbon cities framework and how they should start or how they should adopt the LCCF. And then after that, in 2019, we also introduced Low Carbon Cities 2030 Challenge, which I will describe later. Yeah, and just in 2021, we launched our National Low Carbon Cities Master Plan. Yeah, this master plan is more strategic in terms of what will be the target, what are the action plans for the cities to go about, how they should reduce their carbon emission by 2030 until 2050. So we have 33 cities been selected as a pilot, in order for them to reduce a certain target by those years. Yeah. So that is some introduction about the LCCF. And this is also to support the national agenda to reduce the carbon emission intensity by 45% by 2030. So this is also one of the objectives why we started with this LCCF.
Thank you, Puan. Talking about the LCCF itself, I mean, the impact the framework has had to reducing carbon in existing cities, but what are the main challenges MGTC is facing in local authorities adopting this framework?
Actually, there are several challenges that we face during the implementation of the LCCF, and also we found out the challenges among the local authorities, especially. One of it is on the policies and directions, because this low carbon is still not mandatory. It is voluntary for them to adopt. And then there are a lot of so sometimes the direction or also the commitment from the top management is also very important. Because if let's say we approach the planners, but they really need the direction from the top management, which the highest authority of the cities. So this is one of the challenges. And then the second one is that in terms of the implementation and also execution, we found out that there is still lacking or the absence of dedicated unit that in charge of this low carbon initiative. And then some of them, they are like moving around, so we need to give the capacity building continuously. So this is also another issue on the implementation and also execution. And then the third one is in terms of source of funding. So this is also quite critical, because when they want to do any low carbon projects, so the funding is quite limited, because some of the cities like DBKL, Putrajaya, yes, they are quite I think they are quite advanced, and then they have a lot of resources, whether in terms of the manpower, in terms of the money. But then some of the cities, they are still lacking in terms of funding. That's why 2 years back, we introduced Grant Pemangkin Bandar Rendah Carbon, or GRAC we call it. It's a grant given to the local authorities to kickstart the low carbon projects. This is something that we introduced so that they can kickstart with the low hanging fruits project. For example, changing the bulb into the LED, for example. So just to kickstart the initiative, right? This is also the challenges. I would say is one of the main challenges. Yeah, and then in terms of the capacity building, as I mentioned earlier, the capability and also readiness. Yeah, and also data. Data for GHG inventory, for example, because the data in Malaysia, I think, is still lacking. Yeah? A lot of things need to be improved because when we want to do the GHG inventory for the cities, the data is one of the issues that always highlighted by the local authorities. Yeah? So these are some of the key challenges when we embark on the LCCF.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, I mean, the three challenges, particularly on the data side, I mean, the three challenges really are linked to those data and having the right thing to ensure that the right implementation could be done, which then leads me to, you know, what you mentioned earlier about low carbon cities 2030, right? So because this looks to boost sort of the green economy, create green jobs and attract FDIs, both from sort of locally, I mean domestically, as well as, you know, internationally. And this looks to develop climate resilience as part of it. So what, can you let us know what role will the LCC 2030, you know, play in guiding property developers in sort of helping to deliver a low carbon future for Malaysia?
Thank you for that question. Yes, we introduced the Low Carbon 2030 Challenge, or LCC 2030 Challenge, in 2019. Yeah, the objective is to accelerate the transformation of the cities into low carbon cities. Yeah, at least they kickstart something. Yeah, that's why it is more on the recognition of the cities when they embark on any low carbon projects. Yeah, so but for the LCC 2030 Challenge, it is not only the responsibility of the cities or the local authorities, but then the developers, the universities, even the schools, all the buildings or the organizations within the cities can also participate in this LCC 2030 Challenge. Yeah, so for developers, why is it good to and we encourage to participate in this LCC 2030 Challenge is that we can see that Gamuda, for example, they are quite aggressive and also advanced, because they participated in this program for the past 2 years. Yeah, so we can see that Gamuda Cove and then and another two also get that recognition last year. So we can see that the development made by the developers are really is really great, you know, because we can see that with the low carbon development, if compared to business as usual, the strategies being addressed. Yeah, so they address in terms of the energy, in terms of waste management, in terms of water consumption, in terms of the mobility, it is more integrated, and also in terms of the greenery. So this is where the elements that we are looking at for this LCC 2030 Challenge. So these are the 5 elements, which is the energy, water, waste, transportation, and also the and then the and also the greenery. So these are the aspects that we look into the organizations that participate in this LCC 2030 Challenge. So the developers can also play a big role, to support the development in the cities. So for this year, there are more developers like SP Setia who is also interested to participate. They already registered. So these are some of the initiative, and some progress been made. That's with us, because the government is really happy that more developers and also even the public sector, even the universities, the schools, the mosques, they are also participating in this program and showing the progress. They have reduced some emission reduction based on their initiative. So we will continuously monitor the progress. Because this SCC 2030 challenge is more on the it's a bottom-up approach, because, for example, Shah Alam, they started with section 13, and then they moved to another section 14, and then for the UITM, for example. So at the end of the day, because their target is by 2030, they will have the Shah Alam as a low carbon city. So that would be the strategic objective of the Shah Alam, for example.
That's great. So it's good to know that large property developers are taking this challenge up. What we want to do is make sure that the property developers who are here today hopefully will take this challenge up if you have not adopted this framework yet. So, and it's good to know that you mentioned earlier one of the challenges you're facing is also planners, and we have a planner in the house today. And I'd like to bring the second panelist into this now. Dato, Ismail Ibrahim is a professional town planner, he's a registered town planner, and a part of the board of town planners in Malaysia with a career spanning over nearly 40 years. Served both private and public sector. Still very young, absolutely. Worked for the government of Penang, Khazanah, CEO of Iskandar Development. So he's a heavyweight in property development. So, Dato, welcome your views on what Norhasliza here mentioned about the challenges they face from that respect to LCCF, but more so, what do you see in terms of planning requirements for property developers and how things should move forward when you consider the landscape of sustainability?
Thank you, Gani. Thank you to the organizer for inviting me to represent the Malaysian Institute of Planners to share our views relating to what I term as sustainable land use planning for this particular session. But by way of introduction, let me give a bit of a overview about what really is land use planning about. Some of us might be dealing with a lot of development, of course with the exception of Dato here, but little that actually about how this whole perspective of development are being treated or being categorized. Now, when we talk about land use planning or development, we can simply categorize it into two. One is we term as development. That is about growth, doing construction, all that. But the other one is about control. Little that actually we know about control, but I will try to elaborate later. Now, those are the two limbs of land use planning, development and control. Now, moving on, when you talk about wanting to do development, you must first need to know what is your right as an owner, and whether as an owner of a land, do you have also the right to develop that land? Now, under the Malaysian context, ownership of land has its condition. You can own a piece of land, but the condition shall state whether you own it in a perpetuity or you own it over a period of time. That is as far as land is concerned. But even if you own those land in perpetuity or leasehold or whatever, but the moment you decide to develop that land, that right to develop is no longer with the landowner. The right to develop rests with the appropriate planning authority. It's for the planning authority, as the authority charged with the whole planning and development of that particular area, that will decide whether your interest in developing the land that you own can be done or not. That is the general rule. General rule. Now, in order for an applicant to get that permission, of course, he needs to serve upon the authority what is termed as the application for planning permission, So when the authority treats that application, the authority will, at the end of the day, makes a decision on that application, whether to refuse, or whether to approve, or whether to approve with conditions. Now, in the treatment of planning application, the authority must be mindful of the fact that they must refer to several documentation or several instruments, one of which is the law relating to planning, which currently govern, if you are in Kuala Lumpur, the law relating to planning in Kuala Lumpur, or for the rest of Semenanjung, you have the Town and Country Planning Act of 1976. Now, in the treatment of application, the appropriate planning authority must refer to not only the laws, but also to the guidelines, standards, and whatever rules and regulations and policy that have been issued or in place in that particular area. And when we talk about guidelines and policies and standards, it's not only those issued by the local authority as the local planning authority, but also those issued by other relevant authorities. Kerja Raya lah, Pengairan dan Saliran lah, Perumahan lah, all those. Yeah. Now, at the crux of it, the important part of this treatment shall be in reference to a statutory development plan. Why I say a statutory development plan? Because the statutory development plan is the plan that actually charts the growth of a particular area. And if you are an owner of land that falls within the area in which the plan is enforced, then the local authority must make sure that your development is in conformity with the provisions of the plan. Now, why I'm saying this? Because when you deal with sustainable land use planning, this is where the plan plays a role. If the appropriate authority fails to incorporate sustainability in the provisions of the plan, then the plan cannot see how in future the growth of that particular area is sustainable. So it is therefore very important for purposes of this, for the planning authority to ensure that in prescribing the plan, they must incorporate matters relating to sustainability, and in this case, sustainable land use plan. So today, we are fortunate by the fact that we have plans all over the place. But the question of whether those plans are coordinated, whether those plans incorporate enough matters that deals with sustainability, or whether those plans are doable, that is a question that we need to answer. I stop there for a moment, and perhaps I deal with the questions later.
But Dato, it's good that you brought up the fact that there needs to be a balance with how land use planning, how it approaches and how it can achieve a sustainable development, which then is equitable, that has good financial management, but also has, that talks about, you know, climate aspects as part of it, and then how can that balance be sought? How can that be achieved to ensure that everyone who's involved, all the stakeholders involved, can achieve the outcomes equitably? So, in that sense, coming to that, you know, so how do you feel that then developments, you know, can play a key role in driving the economy forward? And what are the practices that you think property developers should be considering in driving that aspects forward?
Thank you. We deal with those two matters in one breath, okay? Now, we are talking about balanced, sustainable land use planning, sustainable resource and financial management. Actually, based on my experience in dealing with land use development, there is actually no set formula. I think my colleagues will also agree with that. There's no set formula because when we deal with areas, we are dealing with different location, different types of development, different size of development, and each of them has got its own peculiarities. But having said that, doesn't mean that we don't have a solution to it. But we need to be mindful. And I'm giving you, a set of parameters that we need to be mindful of when we deal with what I meant by having a balanced sustainable land use planning that deals with resources and financial management. Now, number one, earlier I mentioned about plans. So the big question is, when you have a plan, are those plans doable? We've heard a lot of stories about plans being launched in a very high, with all the balloons and the banks and all that. But at the end of the day, end up on the shelves of the officials. This is not good. The big question is why those plans end up in the shelves. Because those who are involved in the formulation of the plan think less of how can the plan be executionable, be doable, and this is something that we have to be realistic. We have to be on the ground. And then the other one is about plans must also take into consideration the financial part as well as the availability of resources. Sometimes we always like to look at happenings in the world over. We would like to be a city in Japan. We would like to be a city in Europe. We would like to emulate what's happening in the United States of America. But little do we know that we don't have that much of a financial resources. We don't have the resources that they have. So we have to be realistic about things. And if you are short of finance, you have to think about how to fund for that. You have to talk to the bankers, the MOF, and here we are in Banagara, maybe get guidance from them how to raise funds, and to make sure that the plans are doable based on realistic financial availability and resources. Number 3 is about ensuring that those plans are coordinated. I mentioned earlier that there are so many plans being formulated by so many agencies. I think people in the business community, at the end of the day, they got confused. Which plan to follow? Everyone claims that their plan is the plan. But whether we have 100 plans or only 2 plans, if those plans are not coordinated, then it will add more confusion to all the stakeholders. So plans, you have, those that exist horizontally, those that exist vertically, and some plans deal with specific subject matter. Our friends from the Green Authority just now mentioned about the low carbon, which I'm glad to say that Iskandar was the first region to have the low carbon in Malaysia, and we deliver 5 local authorities at one time. Thank you for your guidance as well. So this is important to have a plan that is coordinated, not only vertically, but horizontally. Now, thirdly, I'm talking about the need to have adequate publicity and to have a good storyline in order not only for us to engage the population at large, but relevant to this particular seminar or to this particular session, relevant to the business community. Like it or not, when you deal with the business community, all they have in mind to make money, to make profit. That's how they expand their operation. Sorry, Dato, I'm being truthful here. But at the same time, if we don't raise that awareness among each other, then little do we know that in order for us to strive and make more money, if you are, mindful of the environment, respect of the environment, you can actually do better than what we've done before. And thirdly, at every time, to clearly state the benefits, how this all will benefit the nation and the population at large. Now, sorry, I'm taking a bit of time. I'm answering to your second question just now. Best practices for property developers. I think the best person to talk about best practices would be none other than Dato lah. So I leave the best part to him. But since the question is on me, I will tackle it from a land use planning perspective. Okay, Dato, Now, I always look at development. People always construe development as something that is positive. Development means growth, everything is good. But if it is not done properly, and I will explain the word, what do we mean by properly, the result could be the opposite. The result could be opposite. What is seen to be a short-term gain could be a long-term deficit. So that is something that we have to think about, and it leaves you to think. Yeah. So I look at development as constituting three dimensions. Number one is about time. So when you do planning, it must be able to survive over time. When it's what survive over time, it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I don't know, 50 years or whatever. You have to think about it. And you have also to think about how, as I mentioned earlier, that plan can deal with matters vertically. Unfortunately, here in Malaysia, we deal with 3 levels of government. And you can see how they talk to one another. And it is a very challenging thing. So some policies come from federal, another policy comes from local authorities, and we need to ensure that they speak to one another. Our colleague from Green Authority just now mentioning about how the policies derive from federal and how they are getting the cooperation from the local authority to have it implemented. And whilst there may be certain objectives that may also give rise to several what I term as unintended consequences. This is the fear, this is the challenge that is put upon us. So that's why I always view property, including housing, industrial, commercial, as one that supports economic growth. When I say supports economic growth, doesn't mean that property is not important. In fact, it is even more important than those sectors that are dominant in the economy. Why I say support? Because there is the other limb of property. Property is not about business and economy and growth. Property deals with the human side, with the social aspect. So, from just purely for profit, property also deals with social obligation. So this is something that is important. But only if certain conditions are met. Number one, we have to deal with demand and supply. A lot of us, when you look at numbers, we only say, oh, there is a property bubble and it is bursting all over the place. But we look little beyond those numbers. When I was in Iskandar, of course people say that there is property bubble burst. But I told them, look at behind those numbers. Let's say we take 1,000 units. Actually, the demand for houses actually more than 1,000. And why do you say that there is a property burst? Because the supply doesn't meet with the demand. That is as simple as it gets. So I do not want to deal further. I'm sure Dato will know what I meant by that. Yeah?
And Dato, I mean, yeah, it's good that you are covering these points, and maybe I would like to give the floor to Dato Michael Yam now to go through maybe some of the things that Dato Ismail has raised, and some of the things that maybe upon Norhasliza has raised. But for the crowd here, I mean, this is Dato Sri Michael Yam, career spanning over 40 years. He's the past president of Chartered Institute of Building, Royal Institute of Chartered Building Surveyors. He's the patron of Real Estate Housing Developers Association of Malaysia, which is REDA. He has, sits in many boards. He has experience not just in Malaysia, but around the world, globally in the UK, South Africa, Australia, and he's managed several public listed companies as well. So, Dato Sri, invite you to the floor to give your views, particularly, what's been mentioned to you about property development is just not about, for profit, but for social. But what are the sort of challenges you think property developers are facing?
Ya, selamat petang, selamat datang, salam sejahtera, salam Madani Malaysia. Politically correct. From private sector, we must be in the good books of the government. Nandri Gandhiji, thank you for inviting me into the panel. These two experts have actually spoken on most of the things that I was going to speak on. I'm only going to comment with what they say, but I had prepared just 5 very quick slides to provide the backdrop of this discussion. As I wasn't here earlier, I sense that I'm like Elizabeth Taylor's 7th husband. I don't know what the performances of the other 6 are, and I don't know what their, how good they are, but I'm just going to come from the cold and just going to say a few things on the subject, which is actually ESG. I think Dato Ibrahim's take on the ecosystem of property development, supply and demand is a fantastic one. I don't have to repeat that. But I was trying to concentrate on that ESG and allow me to just do 3 slides of promotion. One is, of course, today I wear the hat as founding trustee or director of GreenRe, which is Green Real Estate. This was set up 10 years ago. The players in the industry decided that our members, which stretches from the big listed companies to the smaller developers in Kelantan and Terengganu, need to start embarking on this journey of greenness. And at that time, we have GBI, which we're involved in. Just between you and the gatepost, it was a bit expensive for them to do the rating. So that was a decision made at Radar Council, where I was the president, and say, we need to come up with something which I think our members in the East Coast, in the far-flung places of Kedah would say, yes, I want my development to be rated. And that's how Green Real Estate was started. It's not for profit. Today, we are now 10 years old and going strong. So here we are. Is this my chart? Okay. Can we run the next one? I'm trying to. Who is controlling the mic? Yep. Okay. All right. So we have now over 400 projects registered, covering 400 million square feet. We actually has a command of about 70% of the market, but unfortunately, it's only about 1% of the total built up. So we need to start bringing in even the existing building stocks. And there's a way of getting around it by giving incentives so that people who own houses in USJ or Taman Tun or in Iskandar would say, I want my house rated now, or there's an old one, can we now refit and retrofit and improve? And that's a way to accelerate. So we have 4 grades of rating. Next slide. Platinum, gold, silver, and bronze, and we cover almost everything, including the township tools. Just that people are not aware, this whole thing came about, this conference came about essentially because of the ESG and probably the 17 SDGs, right? And the most recent agenda, which is COP26 and COP27, becomes very important and become very visible to all the people in the world. So what is COP26 and COP27? It's conference of partners. I think it's a bit complicated. COP26 was in Glasgow 2 years ago, and COP27 in Egypt. And if I can break it down to only 4 key commitments by the world, right? One is loss and damage, developing countries to seek financial assistance for loss and damage. So the world is saying, especially poor nations, it's fine that you want to impose all these standards, but you have chopped down the trees and damaged the earth. Now you expect me, poor nation, who is barely keeping my citizens not hungry, and you're telling me that. You want us to do that? Please set up an escrow fund that we can tap on. So that's basically, interestingly enough, I think the developed countries have signed on that. The 2015 Paris Agreement is basically one that requires all nations, and I think Malaysia is a signatory to that, that we will give our commitment that the temperature will not go beyond 1.5% by 2050, versus the original pre-industrial level. Next key point, to boost low-emission energy generation. Some of the adaptation includes building flood defenses, preserving wetland, restoring mangrove swamp, and regrowing forests, which now become more urgent as you watch television and things are getting from bad to worse. So that's at macro level. And what is Malaysia's commitment to align itself to COP26 and 27? So 1, reduction of greenhouse gas, halt deforestation, voluntary carbon market. The other commitments, implement nature-based solution, maintain at least 50% forest cover as pledge, and then key item focus on at COP27 include finalizing rules for compliance-based carbon market, iron out global stock take. I think this is a carbon exchange. All right, I think this slide will be available. I just want to take one more overview. Construction and the built environment employs some 6% of the world's workforce and contribute between 6 to 12% of the country's GDP. It's something which we cannot ignore. If this thing is going to disappear, 6% of the world's population is going to be unemployed. And most countries' GDP will drop between 6 to 12. In Malaysia, of course, at the moment, we are hovering around maybe 4%, 3 to 5%. But in fact, as part of the MPC's Nexus of Awesome, please can you study properly, what is in the basket that you call GDP? Because I think it's more than that. They may not count the upstream and downstream industry. So for instance, Industrial Building System, IBS, Gamuda's IBS system comes under manufacturing, right? But in reality, the only reason why IBS exists is because of the construction industry. So somewhere down the line, they need to factor that. In terms of the value, right? In 2022, the value of construction and the built environment, and that would probably include infrastructure and services, is almost US 10 trillion. Think about the impact. Think about even just financiers funding this, right? And all the end users. And it is projected by 2037, this value will go up to as much as US 14 trillion. All of us are in this meal, this value chain. So that's something we need to take note of. And it impacts, in Malaysia, I know, more than 140 upstream and downstream industry. I was bold enough to actually go to KPKT and say that if we don't have the industry, there won't be a Ministry of Housing, right? And that's employment in the government, right? So are all the planners, Plan Malaysia, all my good friends in the council, in the local authority, and so on and so forth, because this is all part of the food chain. So I think that's what I want to say macroly and microly. I would just add one more. This is something which I felt would lead to better sustainability. The sustainability agenda to have some level of success and hopefully meets the sustainable goals set for 2050, it has to be driven by one, market demand. What is this market demand? People conviction. Dato was talking about supply and demand and all that. We have many moving parts. I like to be green, 5-star, but affordability. Our Khazanah research is talking about 5-6 times is really unaffordable. But sorry, for your information, London, Paris, and others are probably double digit, right? Okay, then another thing is it must be government facilitated. So unfortunately, especially in Malaysia, unless you bring out the rod, people are not going to comply. So government facilitation will be through legislation, which is the stick, and incentives, which is where MGTC comes in. I think that's need to be sensitive to that. And it needs to be client-led. So who are the clients? Developers such as myself. Sorry, I retired 14 years ago, so don't blame me for past mistakes. The banks, of course. Yeah? And then you have the institutions, which basically is government, the corporates, and the investors. All right? The sustainable journey would be quicker and smoother if all these stakeholders are better coordinated, more systemic, and properly managed with the involvement of all the stakeholders. I'll just end by one reality here, and that is, there is a cost to sustainability. There's a cost and inconvenience. I think we all have to decide whether we can afford it and whether it is a need or a want. And not recognizing and accepting the obvious can lead to disastrous consequences for the future generations by 2050. Yet, I will also have a slight contrarian challenge in my mind, and that's in my last slide, which is one. Yeah, this one. It happens to be actually Climate Summit. It doesn't refer to this one. I still remember the Y2K. I still not sure 25 years ago when Y2K happened, whether it was a hoax or it's something that created a lot of jobs, a lot of people been rich, all right, I almost think this could be, and I suspect it is probably a leveling up formula for the Western countries, because they can't beat the cheapness, right, the affordability of things being produced in the less developed country, right? It's not just green, it's about social, right? And I think it's a good thing. You remember Nike and iPhone was going to boycott products that come from China because they were not put in proper housing, proper food, proper clothing and all that. I think it's the right thing to do, social. But that will be an increasing cost. Whether that is part of leveling up the competition, I think the jury is still out there. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Very interesting perspective, Dato. The fact is, climate change is not visible. It's not, you can't see it. It's not moving faster. It's a very slow moving train, but it's moving, right? The fact that all of us, as you mentioned, are in this gravy train of property development, our livelihood relies on it, but protecting social outcomes is a clear part of this. So, and how do you see, property developers being part of this chain? Dato Ismail mentioned, of course, you're in the business to make money, and that's rightly so too, but it's got to be equitably made. It has to be fair on the people who are actually going to buy those properties. So how do we then ensure that property developers, drive a greater adoption of better practices in green building or greener construction, and that without costing an arm and leg for sort of end users when they buy this, and then end users at the end of the day also want these properties to be green so that they can reduce their energy consumption. So how can we promote this?
I think number one, most important is the education process. So the fact that we went on this journey 10 years ago, all the members of Radar, which comprises all the players in it, is really fully aware of this. And a lot of them now are coming for green rating, even if it's just been rated. The lowest is actually bronze. Lately, I've been signing a lot of certificates. Petrol station, even I was shocked, KK 99 Speed Mart comes, yeah. So I said, well, something like this. Now, they probably suddenly realize it's like those days when you have ISO, it becomes important. It becomes a marketing and branding opportunity. But it's okay. It's like the kid going to kindergarten, he's got 5 stars on his label. He feels very good. I think that's a good start to this whole thing. To accelerate this, essentially I go back to the stick and carrot approach, okay? So Qatar those days, I think were very realistic. I still remember for commercial building, when you go green, we went and told them that there's going to be additional 15% increase in cost, right? 15%. And obviously it has to be 15 because there was no economy of scale. You import low V glass, it's going to cost you X amount. You wanted special insulation, it's going to cost you more money. And Qatar then we were asking for for incentive, stamp duty and all that. And I still remember one of the things they do, which is quite innovative, which doesn't cost them any money, is that, okay, if you're building, I'm giving an example, if you're building, normal building is 100 million because you spend an additional 15 million, that 15 million additional cost that you have incurred, and if your building is built for rental, I will offset that 15 million additional cost from your rental. Not immediately, because you never get 15 million. For 100 million building, if you get 10% yield, you'll be lucky to get 10 million. And if you take cost 50, you only make 5 million. So if they're good, they might give you 3 years to write off your 15 million. But that's a great incentive. How do you get better adoption? My view with this, I think the biggest number of units in housing stock, and I think there's probably about 8 million units of housing, okay? Informal to formal housing. If the government says, okay, all new development that you will get green rated, and it might cost, say, 2,000 ringgit. That's to comply with the basic. I will now give you a 25% discount on your stamp duty. It's a zero-sum game, all right? I think that will really accelerate. And then one other thing, that's 8 million existing. We're only supplying about 150,000, I think, units, of which 500,000 of those are affordable housing, so they're not going to be able to afford it. Okay, so about 100,000. That embracement of the greenness as a whole is going to be slow. So really, you should be looking at existing housing stock and say, if you go to green real estate or go to GBI, get it rated bronze, and by then all the link houses will know how much it costs. Maybe 5,000 ringgit because you've got solar panels, maybe thicken the wall, increase the overhang, even put a simple canopy and all that. Okay, I know it's going to cost you an extra 5,000, just standard. Anyone get rating? 5,000 ringgit off your stamp duty. There's no stamp duty, so you go back to the council and say, you need to reduce your assessment. Cukai pintu kan? Cukai pintu, over 5 years, I allow you to write it off. I think that would be a quick, low-hanging fruit, easy win. And I can think of so many things. And you know, once this goes into the culture, you go to UK, new buildings, no issue, already complied. My days when I was a construction engineer, no building is less than U value of 1. That's a transmittance or heat loss outside to inside. Today, I think it's 0.25 or whatever it is. You'll never get approval without that. I mean, everyone draws a drawing, it's going to be. That's why when you walk into a new building in the UK, you already feel warm even in winter. The body heat generated is captured in there. What do they do with old building? All old buildings have to have a rating called EPC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 4. When I'm a buyer and I look on the window, the real estate agent, and say this apartment in Knightsbridge or Hammersmith is rated EPC 3, another one is EPC 4, I can tell the difference in terms of the amount of what you need to pay for that building. And today, you know, UK, with all the energy increase and all that, you're going to really factor in because, you know, £6,000 was what you need to pay last year because government comes in. One government lost because they promised 2,000. Today it's probably £4,000. But that saving of £2,000 compounded over the next few years means that you now look at rating pretty seriously. That's something which I think a roadmap which the government can work and come together, right? Without costing the government much money, some deferred payment perhaps. Leave it to the private sector. I will tell you now, of course in my days, I only built high-end. Okay? I was known as Mr. Monkera. My people can pay because these people have got the money. So if you even want to do the same thing in another outlying part of Kuala Lumpur, it's suicidal because the market doesn't support that, right? And don't forget, Malaysia's developer are the most regulated and the ones that provide the most cross-subsidy to help government provide affordable and low-cost housing. Okay, in those good old days, 30% of whatever you build. So 1,000 units, you must build 300 units of low-cost housing. I still remember at 25,000 ringgit and then went to 45,000 ringgit. The cost to build that is 100,000. Someone is subsidizing that. Today, because they knew that was just impractical 20 years later, 30 years later, every state has got its own scheme. Selangor has got its Rumah Selangorku.
That's right.
They tweak the thing. Out of 1,000 units you build now, 40% is affordable. Now, 900 square feet, if I recall, 10%, that's at 220,000 ringgit. Another 10% is 150,000 ringgit. 20% is at 80,000 ringgit. It's all subsidized, right? In fact, the developer, to make it viable, not so profitable, that's why I got out of the game, you have to add, in my time, 30,000 ringgit on every unit of commercial unit, the sort of unit you buy before I even start. It is a toll collection, right? So I think government again need to reform and look at it. Do you want to shackle the developers because they have to do all this cross-selling stocks I have to hold because the people who qualify for this affordable housing needs to be approved by the government, of which 60-70% don't qualify for bank loan. Now you go back again to look for a new list. Meantime, you're funding the construction, you're paying the contractor, and at today's interest rate, at 7.5% to the bank for holding the stock. and putting the security in, because if you hold it for too long, your MCB or your electrical wiring all gets stolen. I mean, this is reality. So I would have thought, and I've spoken to former ministers before, please release us from this. Let us maximize the profit, and you tax us and take that and go up to federal fund, because we are subsidizing.
So fantastic view, Dato Sri. The fact that, you know, if the market is liberalized to some extent, then we potentially can get the outcomes we want from a sustainable point of view. So it's really great. Now, we've come to actually the end of the session, but what I'd like to do is invite audiences over here to ask this fantastic panelists here some questions based on what they have shared with you now. And the first 5 questions, we have a special prize for you. We have a signed book by Dato Sri Michael on the real estate development for the last 10 years in Malaysia. So, first 5. You got to be quick. Go ahead, sir.
The question must be intelligent. Don't ask me, am I married and how many kids?
I was about to ask that question. I mean, okay. Very good evening. My name is Rizalman. I come from KSK Group. I have
KSK?
Yeah, KSK.
KSK Land.
Yeah, KSK Land.
8 Conley.
Yes, the 8 Conley. So I have 2 questions actually. Number 1, we look at it into the way that we do stuff here in the industry, right? So previously we have about almost 1,000 public listed company. And I just counted just now in the website of Bursa, 111 is actually for property development. So which is more than 10% actually goes to property development. And this is actually accounted for big players. Right? For members of VEDA, it's about 1,000 plus. So 100 plus is actually considered as a public listed, which is the big guys. So we talk about sustainability. I like the way that you mentioned it just now. Right? So VEDA should cater also for the small developer in Kelantan and Terengganu and such. But the way that been played, the word sustainability and ESG compliance, it's kind of creating an exclusive club, only big boys club. Fortunately enough for KSK, we are considered as a big boy as well. So for our colleague from Sunway, Gamuda, so it become an exclusive for big developer. Right, so how do we want to tickle it down to the small developer, right? Because I come from Pontian, which is with Dato Ismail before this in Ilda. So Pontian area, developer in Pontian will not care about sustainability, right? We look at it into how LCCF, I'm also the first pilot of LCCF in UTM, so I'm part of the team of LCCF as well. Look at it into only certain players can actually be on board in this matter. While we should actually look at it into more inclusive approach, how can we include our small players as well in this matter? So I wanted to look at it into your opinion on that. So that's the first question, right? So
would you mind making it, second question is shorter than,
So the second question is quite simple here. So we look at it into play the ball game of economy here, right? We look at it into the property developer. But I also wanted to look at it into what go beyond property, right? Meaning that after the property development completed, which is about 6 years, 6-7 years, and then it could be longer than that. But the operational of the building will be 30-40 years. So we should address that thing as well, because literally a couple years ago, I was involved when I was in CIDB. I was involved in one of the procurement by the government agency. It was a gold-wearing GreenRe building in PJ. Beli je, tutup semua, pasang aircon. So what's the purpose of having green building? Right, so I want to take your point with that. Thank you.
Could I direct that to...
Sure, I'm going to give you 2 books for that.
No, just the one. Just the one. We need another 4.
Apa nama lagi, saudara? Rizalman. Oh, that one like the fashion designer lah. Yeah, but you got no long hair and no rings, so it's okay. Okay, I want to contradict you number 1, with regards to it's not a rich man's club. So you just mentioned your numbers are not bad. 1,000 over, I think it's 1,350 now. I'm a past president. Sometimes they call me the late president because I attend meetings late. There are 1,000 members. Of course, the big boys, 100 of them are in it because they find radar is good branding. all right? You must remember, radar is an NGO. It's not a professional body, right? People can come in and they can go out. The only way to join radar is through the state association. So if you're from Pontian and you're a developer, you would join radar Johor. So in there, you would have vote yourself into the committee, right? And those people will become part of the National Council by election. So it probably reflects UMNO MCA method. It goes down to the kampung level. So I want to contradict that. The reason why big boys are more visible because they have more resources. There are more professionals in there. They are prepared to second their MDs, senior managers, into the committee and subcommittees. Because every week we get called from Putrajaya to go and get engaged in various things. So there is the communication and the network that actually reaches down to the kampung. As everyone says, you have to ask, right? So we have thousands of members, as I say, and Kelantan chairman, Dato Sam, Dato Sukarno, people I know, they're very passionate about it, right? Now is Encik Hisham is leading that. In Terengganu is Amir Baktir, right? Once every 2 months, everyone gets together, 32 of us. We know all the problems. That's the advantage of sitting in radar. At first, I wasn't interested. And I realized the problems in each state. And Dato Uno, land is a state matter. That's why he's lucky he's in IRDA. It's autonomy. You cut off at least one of the layer of government, But even that, you're still facing challenges. So it's many hoops to jump. I console myself and say, that actually is a barrier to entry. So KSK can join anytime, they can go out. And in my time, I have actually terminated membership of at least two developers because they didn't comply with the HD and all that. So essentially, it's an NGO, that's all we can do. Not a professional body like Engineer Gandhi, He designed something wrong, he can be cut off and his rice bowl is gone. What's the second question? I must allow the others to... What was the second question?
So the second question, I also forgot already. But the second question, look at that into... Wait, I forgot. So one is about, actually the number one is about how we want to tackle sustainability to small players. So that's number one.
So I've mentioned that we set up GreenRe to help the smaller ones, because I remember another green rating says we're going to charge 2,000 ringgit, for instance, to rate a link house. Now, 2,000 ringgit a link house in Tamanton those days, when you sell 600,000 ringgit, is okay. The 2,000 ringgit link house dekat Pantai Cindabrai, Pantai Cahaya Bulan, his link house is 1,200 ringgit. Right? You talk about affordability, I say you must be nuts. Dato Sam must well go and buy 2,000 ringgit at a Harvey Norman voucher and give it to the buyer. He will sell everything overnight. So this was the first step for them to embark into greenness. And how do you get more adaptation? If the government comes in and say, I'm sure we can do a research and say every house you want to go for just bronze, it will cost them additional 5,000 ringgit. Easy things like some solar panel, maybe more overhang, right? Maybe a bit insulation on the front and back wall, 5,000 ringgit. So give them back through waiver or discount of their cukai pintu over several years. I think that will work.
The second question is on operation maintenance.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I'm now the construction and built environment champion, Nexus. It reminds me of the NKEA those days. Suddenly I got a call and say I'm in. And I look at the whole thing and I say, gee, many moving parts. 5 pillars to this whole built environment construction ecosystem. Number 1, conceptualization. So here is like myself now, what I'm now saying, okay, I want to buy this land, Taman Duta. I want to conceptualize maybe, depending on what City Hall I think will approve, maybe 12 units of high-end condominium, right? It is my wish then, but I know my market. I say I want this to be platinum rated because whatever I put in, gold-plated taps and all those, my buyers will be able to afford it. So 1, it must be driven by conceptualization. If I have that wish, my dream list, my vision, now I'm going to tell Gandhi, can you now design this structure for me? And then I tell the architect, this has to be platinum rated. What I do is to make sure of that, I call Green Real Estate, please go through the drawings, make sure I get platinum. So you get a provisional platinum certificate, right? That's the second stage. Third, you go to approval. This is going to City Hall, going to, I don't know, IRDA, or going to Penang Council. That one is the big elephant in the room, lah. Every time Pemuda is saying how to cut short. I mean, I'm now not doing a normal affordable housing. I want the best, but still they will comment, lah, even if it's a standard building regulation or that. That's the third. The fourth is your construction phase, right? Because when they say, hey, can you reduce the green? I say, you cannot talk to contractors. Contractors go to tender based on your specs and your drawing. Once I tender in, you make any changes, it's VO. A lot of problem, right? So you must do all your pre-planning and conceptualization well in advance, so that when you go to tender, all the contractor will tell you is, well, I think you have thought through it. You want it to be platinum, but can I give you some advice on value engineering? Maybe in sources material a little bit more from this, and use maybe granite instead of marble, because recently oversupplying granite or that. That's all you can tweak. And after that, you get your vacant possession. This is where it matters. All that we have done now have incurred 11% of embedded greenhouse gas emission, because the material you use, right, discharges about 11% in total. What they've forgotten, exactly what you say, the 50 years of post-completion, that emits 28% of the greenhouse gas. Because as you say, this room, the aircon, everything is running. So unless in conceptualization, I say I want to reduce the cost, the EPC4, EPC I'm talking about, this 50 years life cycle is going to cost us a lot of money. Operation, green, maybe you can afford it. Service charge, people will pay. But the point is, that's 28% of emissions. So I am totally agree with you. And in my copyright Michael Yam ecosystem is included in there. And the last thing, again on sustainability, is end-of-life use. How much of that can you recycle? And how do you feed back now to the original client and also the consultants who design and say, well, we better not use this material. The latest one, RAAC, right? Right? The aerated concrete is causing so much problem. Right? So many things. Thanks.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Juanita, one book for him, I'll sign afterwards.
Yeah, one book for you. So, next place over there. And we need to keep the questions a bit short and the answers also short, because we are actually taking up the space of the next panel that's going to come in. So, but, yeah, please. Yes, yourself. Yeah.
So very quickly, what kind of incentive models have you seen in the region as in Thailand or Singapore that would encourage developers that would incentivize them to actually go towards green construction?
Norhasliza?
I have no idea about the other countries because what we have in Malaysia is the green tax incentive. Yeah, this is for, but then that is for the building owners to get the incentive if they have the green building. Yeah, but I think recently they also have a new incentive for the developers as well. So this is something that we look forward, because this will encourage more property developers to develop green buildings in Malaysia. But then for other countries, I'm sorry that I have no ideas about how they encourage more green buildings or green developments in other countries.
Just a little bit, in Australia, you got neighbors rating over there, and if you are able to discover, let know your baseline embodied carbon percent, the operating carbon achieves a certain rate, then there are incentives that are given to property developers to achieve a better outcome. So that's based on a certain rating tool, similar to like GBIs, but the one neighbors have particularly looks at currently on embodied carbon, and therefore by bringing that carbon down, then the developer has incentives to sell it higher, which is permissible under what they can do, and then that cost, of course, is passed to sort of owners who are looking to buy a property that then, which we spoke about earlier, they've got another 50-year life cycle in the building. They'll bring their energy consumptions, they'll bring their cost down for them, and therefore they're incentivized to buy those sort of buildings anyway.
Yeah, I think in IRDA, all green RE or GPS certification, I'm told now, I was just reading through a note here, it says the full tax exemption, presumably stamp duty on sale and rental of buildings. I don't know, Dato, Ibrahim, whether it's true.
Dato Ismail?
Dato Ismail, sorry. Yeah. Apparently IRDA offers a full tax exemption on sale or rental of buildings certified to green real estate or GBI certification until year 2025.
I must qualify myself. I can no longer speak on behalf of IRDA because I've already... No, okay. We have introduced over the years incentives that relate not only with property development but with business. The whole idea is two-pronged. Number one is to encourage economic growth and to lessen the obstacle and the burden that might be faced with companies who wants to grow, including startups. Number two is actually in line with the matters relating with the greening of the region. And on that note, when we look at development per se, we cannot just simply relate it to what we term as the hardwares or the tangibles. We must also look at the software, the intangibles. So intangibles here is, as mentioned here, we must look at how we can further encourage development that would prescribe or subscribe to green, but by way of giving incentives to them. You may have heard of the story of the forest city, which happens to be within Iskandar, Malaysia. I have to admit that. But despite all the stories that you've heard, but one of the great feature of forest city is how they have actually subscribed to green development right from its outset. Of course, it takes years for those development to be realized, the way in which it is planned for. But it all relates to, as Dato mentioned just now, to incentives that would encourage investment to go in this direction. I hope I answered your question.
Yep.
Thank you. We'll try and find some answers for you after this meeting.
So what I'd like to do really, I know we said 5 books, so if you want the 3rd, 4th and 5th book, then please approach Dato Michael or Dato Ismail or Puan Norhasliza and ask them those questions. The first 3 that come after this, and ask those questions personally. I'm sure you can pass the book. Juanita.
There's one question there.
Oh.
Thank you. My name is Peter Yeo. I'm a retiree. When we refer to green, it seems to be that we are talking only about because the 3 pillars of sustainability is, as we know, are ESG, but we seem to be focusing on the E aspect when we talk about green, but not ESG, the 3 pillars. For example, in a neighboring economy, they don't just talk about the E aspect, they also talk about the S aspects. What about the S aspect in property development? We are talking about DEI, diversity, inclusivity, and whatever it is that are found in the formula for DEI. How much of this is actually followed or even implemented in many of the housing projects or commercial projects in the country? And the second point is, when we talk about funding, amazingly, the bulk of the property development companies are found in the capital market. And the capital market management tells us, you come into the capital market, you get access to innovative financing in the capital market. But on the other hand, the property developer says that, no, we need more funding resources. So is the capital market the answer towards the funding needs of the property developers, or more creative solutions? For example, is financing They are talking about intangible assets financing. They are pushing for it. How much of it are familiarized or sort of being practiced in the property development sector? If you look at the amount of these things being done, it's on a mini scale. So the question is, creative solutions are not necessarily needing to come from the government itself. The private sector itself, they claim that they have done this, but have they stretched themselves enough? Thank you.
I think Dato Michael, this is yours.
Me again, I think I need to take Peter into the fire escape area and have a quiet word with him. I think we need to be pragmatic and practical about the whole thing. I totally agree with you, ESG and DEI, right? It's just that the time just does not allow for that. So one of the positive outcome out of the COVID-19 was this. I saw Act 520 of CIDB, right? That says that all workers must be put in proper labor quarters, right? Go across to Singapore, you see proper quarters and all that. Of course, there was a pushback, because number one, the contractors are the one that procure and deliver the project. He says, I want this tender based on the lowest tender, all right? I don't care where my workers come from, and hence you can see them in the middle of the jungle and rubber estates and all that, right? And they come to work. Most of them are actually from a foreign country, right? And the developer says, I've done my calculation. This is the affordability that my market I aim for can afford to buy. I have also priced in the cross-subsidy I need to do, plus all the upfront payment to TMB, Telecom and all that, which is, we are used as a toll collector, which I have now got to bear for at least 2 years during the approval process before I get my developer's license and advertising permit before I can even launch. Those are all costs. This is very practical. As I said, if I'm building a place in Bukit Tungku, this is small money to me because the guy can afford it. You sell a Rolls Royce and you probably make, £100,000, but you sell a little Myvi, you're going to be very cost conscious. So the good thing out of this whole COVID was that suddenly all the developers and contractors have to say, I need to put them in proper quarters. Because if they caught COVID, my project now is get delayed, and I'm going to be lumbered with all the LAD and all the penalties and all that. So that's an improvement. So it's a market that now forces everyone to say, we better price a bit more and try and sell that, right? The DEI thing, unfortunately, in Malaysia is probably will take a long time, right? These things come from the Western countries, where it's color blind, racial blind, religious blind, and then gender blind too, right? When you go to a toilet in the UK, you're not sure whether it's a female toilet or a male toilet. I think we have our own things to be more aware of and to be to adhere to, rather than just copy wholesale. So as I say, it's going to take a long time for me to explain. Green financing, I was 9 years independent Standard Chartered Bank. I can explain that to you. So one way of doing, just one very quickly, if you want to force this thing, developers to go in, it's very simple. Bank negara with the government. I hope none of my developers friends are saying here, if the house, your basic link house is not green rated, no financing by the bank. Okay? Are people prepared to take it on, right? Then those who use green finance, banks talk about, wow, you get reduced interest rate and all that on if you take green financing, right? But if I have a 50-year relationship, 2-generation relationship with UOB, and I'm going to just switch to Standard Chartered Bank just because you give me 0.5%, I'm not sure. We're talking about relationship banking here. If I have to keep jumping the hoops and do all the years you take against the box, my project will never take off. Practicality, I'm saying. So I think it's going to be the start of 1,000 miles with the first step, and I think we have already embarked on the first step. So that's the E. S, there's the S. Governance, well, we can only follow what the government, how the governance standard, and we're trying to emulate, which is not the best example, but there you are. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, we really have to close this session, unfortunately. I'm sure we can keep talking about this, and there's a lot to talk about, and we could spend the whole day. But I really would like to thank the panelists, Norhasliza, Dato Sri Michael Yam, and Dato Ismail here for their time, valuable time sharing all their knowledge and depth of experience with yourself. So in the usual manner, if I could ask you to extend that appreciation by just giving them applause, please.